welcome back to another episode of the Black Girl Iowa podcast, the podcast where we celebrate and elevate the voices of Black women and men who are shaping our communities and making an impact right here in Iowa. I'm your host, Emily, and today's episode is all about the power of using your voice, not just for yourself, but for the people around you, your community, and future generations. In this conversation, we're talking about courage, resilience, and the importance of showing up even when the odds are stacked against you. So let's dive into this week's episode. All right, at this time, I'd like to introduce our guest. She is originally from Jackson, Mississippi, and has Southern and Midwestern roots in Oklahoma and in Iowa. To her, the experiences have made an impact, as she has stated that, I owe my courage to Oklahoma, but Iowa made me a grown woman. A Drake University graduate, she quickly stepped into entrepreneurship and founded Kaleo Enterprises, an organization that creates products and programs to help small businesses grow. Her passion for civic engagement has made her a pillar in the Black community. In 2018, she ran as the Democratic nominee for Iowa Secretary of State, becoming the first Black woman in Iowa to be nominated by a major political party. Then in 2022, she was the Democratic nominee for Iowa governor, and she campaigned across the state advocating for high quality education and access to mental health care for every Iowan. She remains active in the community and is a member and co-founder of Vision Leads, Back to School Iowa, and Ladylike. So, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary friends, I'd like to welcome Deidre DeJear to the show. Deidre, thanks so much for being here.
Hello, Emily. It's my pleasure.
I feel like Deidre is one of those people. I see you everywhere. Like, I came back to Iowa in 2018, and I just remember hearing, I came back during that time because I was gone for about 9 years. Mm-hmm. And Emily, have you met Deidre yet? Have you seen Deidre? Yo, she's changing things in the game. She's doing this, she's doing that. And then I got to meet you during your campaign. For someone to say, you know what, I see where the problems are. I want to jump in. I don't just want to throw money at it or, voice about it. I actually want to do something about it. I feel like that is incredibly powerful. So I'm really happy to just have this conversation with you today. And I want to give you your flowers because to be in a state like this, that is red, that is 89% white, and to where we are just the smallest of the minority groups here in the state, for you to really just say, I'm going to do something, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And if anyone has a problem with it, that's their problem. That's incredible. So that is very inspiring to me. So I want to make sure I give you your flowers first thing before we jump into the conversation.
I appreciate that. And they smell so good. Good.
Good. So I want to kind of talk a little bit. So your trajectory to Iowa is interesting. So born in Jackson, moved to Oklahoma, and then came to Iowa to attend Drake. So tell me about kind of what your experience was growing up, moving from the deep South to kind of like that mid-South area, and then coming up here. What were some things that your family kind of experienced or went through during those times?
We moved when I was around 11 or 12 from Mississippi. I grew up in a very, very large family on both sides of my family. My mother was my mother was the only child. However, when my grandmother had her at the age of 19, my great-grandmother was still having babies. And so my mother grew up with her aunties and uncles as siblings almost. And so my grandmother was one of 13. My dad was one of 11. And so it was just family all around all the time and very close, very connected. I can remember my father's dad, my grandfather, they would every Friday, it would be a Friday night fish fry. I don't know if anybody has ever heard the Mississippi Blues song Friday Night Fish Fry, but those are real and those happen, and there's so much fun and just so much joy around family. And so when I was 8, my mother passed away just a few days after my little sister was born, and that shifted things for my father. He was working. My uncle at the time, they were doing human resource management for small businesses and nonprofits, and they expanded into the home care agency. And so, being a close-knit family and having someone that really meant a lot to the family, and my mother passed away, was really, really hard on everybody. And so people
Mm-hmm.
were not necessarily acting as they would normally act. There was a lot of
Right.
hurt, a lot of anger, a lot of uncharacteristic behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a lot on me as a kid, but I had to grow up real fast. And so my father ended up moving us to Oklahoma, where they were expanding the home care agencies throughout the
Mm-hmm.
state. And that is one where I found out who white people were. Because as a young kid
Mm-hmm.
in Mississippi, although I did see white people, I did not really understand them very
Yeah.
much because there wasn't a lot of interaction and wasn't a lot of engagement
Mm-hmm.
there. And so moving to Oklahoma, I got that engagement. It is also where I found out that I had an accent. It took an
Mm.
Oklahoman to tell me that I had an accent. I didn't
Yeah.
know I had an accent. So my teacher tells me one day, "Teacher, I just love your accent." I said, "What accent?" And as country as I possibly could have. But it was a bit of a cultural shock. I went from being the majority to being the only Black student in my class on most days out of the week, and in most school years. And I
Mm-hmm.
stayed in Oklahoma up until I graduated from college. The part of Oklahoma that I was in, Tulsa, is known as the buckle of the Bible
Yeah.
Belt, where
Mm-hmm.
at the time of me living there were more churches than there were gas stations. And that means
Yeah.
a lot in an oil state. So faith and family were really, really big in the state of Oklahoma. And I would say that's I first started to develop a relationship with God was when I moved
Mm-hmm.
to Oklahoma. I got baptized when I was in Mississippi, but it meant a little bit different when I started taking responsibility for my own faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I really appreciated out of the state of Oklahoma, was that you could find your faith the way that you needed to find your faith, at least
Right.
at that time. I pray that that still exists,
Mm-hmm.
but that's what it was for me then. And so I came to Iowa to go to school. When I was applying for colleges and universities, I was applying all over the country, but nowhere in Mississippi and nowhere in the state of Oklahoma. In fact,
Okay.
the closest state was Kansas. That was the
Okay.
closest state that I applied to a school for. And so when Drake sent me information in the mail, I said, yes, I'm coming. And my admissions counselor is still in my life today. He's
Oh,
now a
that's
small business
awesome.
owner, but I
Yeah.
attribute a lot of what I do to him being persistent with my father to give him
Mm-hmm.
comfort and sending his daughter to a state and a city that neither one of us could pronounce. And so
Yeah.
it was that's how I ended up. I kind of skipped a step. I think I went from Mississippi to Oklahoma and Iowa, but you wanted to know how I got to Oklahoma. I
Yeah.
apologize.
Yeah, no, 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 no. I think that that's awesome. And you said something really interesting about Jackson. So, I have family down there,
Mm-hmm.
and I used to go down there. I've been down there a few times, like when I was little. But when my sister passed away, she passed in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time of me going to Jackson, Mississippi as an adult.
Mm.
And
Does
you
she
had
live there?
mentioned no, she did, yeah, she lived there
Mm.
at the time.
Okay.
And it's just really interesting that you said that when you moved to Oklahoma, that was your first instance where you really saw and really identified, like, oh, this is white people, this is how
Mm-hmm.
they are, right? So Jackson, Mississippi was the first time that I really got to experience predominant blackness.
Mm.
So, and again, so I was 30, and I remember, me and my mom, my dad, and my nephews, we're getting ready for Olivia's funeral and doing all of these things. I remember we went to
That's my middle
Target.
name.
Really? It's kismet. It's meant to be. It's
Mm.
meant to be. Yep.
Mm.
I can hear her now. She was like, Emily, I sent this person because there you go.
Mm.
Oh, that's
It's a good
wonderful.
name. It's a good
Yes,
name.
it is. But I just remember going to Target and walking around Target, and I'm seeing black floor managers, I'm seeing black cashiers, I'm seeing black customers, and just all of this different type, just black people everywhere, and I'm literally staring. And my
Mm-hmm.
mom and my dad, Emily, stop staring. I was like, I can't. There
Mm.
are no white people down here. And I
Mm-hmm.
love it. And now I know why my sister was down here for so long, because Olivia lived down there for a really long time. I didn't really understand, though, that for me
Mm-hmm.
being where I'm from, that I could still experience culture shock, because it
Mm-hmm.
definitely was a culture shock. But for me, it was inverse. It was like, I don't want to leave. Like,
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell people often, like, the experience that I had from moving from Mississippi, Oklahoma, really embedded in me the value in understanding other people. And so when folks have their blinders on, they're in leadership positions, they are in positions to make decisions that impact a variety of folks that they don't understand. I take dramatic issue with that. Dramatic issue with that because I'm a firm believer. I say it often, the key to knowledge is understanding. I get it from the Bible. And, if you don't have that understanding, you are simply making an assessment. You are
Right.
simply an observer. You are not invested because you
Mhm.
don't understand. And so I think it's incredibly important for anybody to step outside of their box and understand not only their own group and where they connect to, but other groups of people.
Right.
There is literally no excuse or reason why you shouldn't in this day and age.
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of the times in our differences is when we start to really recognize that we're actually very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredibly frustrating, especially and we'll get into your political career here in a second, but I know for me, growing up in Iowa and for as progressive as it was in my teen years and my early 20s, to see it just kind of flip to now it's literally this conservative, right wing, very close minded views and things like that. Like it is very frustrating because I know that that's not what I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
There was more diversity in thought, I feel like, when I was a teenager than it is
Mm-hmm.
now. And I'm knocking on the door of 40. So, with that being said, though, I do want to ask you a little bit about about the uniqueness of the experiences of Black women. Do you see, you lived in Mississippi, lived in Oklahoma, and here. Do you see like a difference or a uniqueness in Black women that are from kind of those different areas?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. What are some of those uniquenesses and differences between the three?
Mississippi Black women are very connected to their communities. They truly have a pulse in what's happening, whether it's their own family, it's their own neighborhood, like wherever they have planted, they are connected and they know the pulse. Even when they don't like the people, they know the pulse. They know what's
Right.
happening. And, I don't see that as much as I see it in that state. I mean, they know everything that's happening. And they're incredibly, not to say that no other Black woman is witty, but they're incredibly witty
Mm-hmm.
and can make fun of almost anything in like
Mm-hmm.
the drop of a hat.
Right.
I love Mississippi humor.
Mm-hmm.
It's low key Black office humor, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yes.
I love it, love it, love it, love it. Also got a little Dolomite humor in there too.
Yeah.
So yeah, and when I think about Oklahoma Black women, I think about women who definitely I don't want to stereotype at all, but the group of Black women that I was surrounded by that were really invested in the faith community.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw like just this willingness to submit to God in a way that I haven't seen in a lot of places, and not just amongst Black women, just amongst
Mm-hmm.
women in general. Their faith is so strong and it's so committed and so unwavering. And sometimes it appears to be unwavering to a fault for some outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
That's the characteristic that I take with me from
Mm-hmm.
the women who I learned from in the state of Oklahoma. I get my strength and my connectivity from Mississippi Black women. I get my faith from Oklahoma Black women. And in Iowa, this is where I found freedom. Iowa has some of the freest Black women that you could ever find. And sometimes they don't know how free they are, but authenticity is like just a part of everything in their being. They're so bold, they're so brave, and they're advocates, like like freedom rider type of advocates on. And it could be something so basic as talking about Doritos, like whatever
Yeah.
my favorite chip is, like 10 toes down, come
Right.
for me. Like
Right.
I just love that
Mm-hmm.
about Iowa Black women. And yeah, so those are some of the characteristics that I kind of garnered from those group of Black women that I can at least think of at the top of mind right now.
Yeah, and I really love that because experiences, they are definitely going to be different, but I think what I really like about what you said is that those are all strengths. But to be connected, to be vested in your faith, and also to be free and to be authentic and to be yourself, I feel like, oh, that speaking to Iowa Black women, that's what we have to do because,
Mhm.
no one expects greatness from us. So we kind of just have to be great on our own. And we have to also bring others along to share in our greatness. And
Mhm.
I've seen you do that. I've seen other Black women in the community do that as well, to where you can even see someone have a pop up shop where they're selling dinners, but at the same time, you look at the other side and someone's selling T-shirts, someone's
Mhm.
recommending where you can go to get candles. Like there is just this really nice sharing and diversity of thought. I feel like that happens here in
Mhm.
Iowa for Black women, and it's because no one's going to do it for us.
And I think it's to the point that you made earlier about no one else is going to expect much out of us.
Hmm.
I think what I've seen as a strength in many Iowa Black women is that the expectation is a moot point. They don't
Hmm.
care what others expect. Their expectations are a priority. Their journey is a priority. And I think that's what empowers their boldness.
Yes.
Us as women have our bouts of insecurity in more ways than one. But if
Hmm.
we can be secure about our path, our direction, what we believe in, and where we're going, then those insecurities are mitigated by that power that we have. And so I think oftentimes in our moments of insecurity, we're looking for people to expect things from us. We're
Yes.
looking for people to tell us what to do or to lift us up, to honor us. But that expectation literally has nothing to do with our purpose. It's like a bonus. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. But we should never, ever dwell on the others' expectations.
Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. Because I think kind of like what I had told you before. So, me and Deidre, we talked probably for like a good 20 minutes before this conversation even started, y'all. That's how all my podcasts, all my shows go, by the way. Like, there's always like a 10 to 15 minute. We are literally just catching up, breaking down all of the other stuff. And then it's just like, oh, we should probably
Yeah,
get
we should
this
get
interview
started, huh?
going now. But something that, we kind of talked about beforehand was, the purpose of this podcast. And it wasn't was at first, I know I want to create this safe space. I just don't know how to do it. But I also didn't ask permission to do it. I just did it. And I see a lot of women just doing that. And um, I think that also leads really into us talking about your political career. So, one of the things that I had told you is that I love how you say, I don't really care what anyone else is going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. So let's kind of go back to what sparked your passion for civic engagement. What was kind of the thing? What was the catalyst that you said to yourself, we need to see some changes, and the changes aren't happening fast enough?
I don't think that was my position.
Okay.
I don't think that my position was it wasn't that we need to see some changes and the changes aren't happening fast enough. It wasn't even I don't care what others are doing. It was more so I had since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with history and obsessed with problem solving. I am moved and motivated by watching progress happen. And for some reason, a part of my child rearing, I didn't have a lot of political folks in my life. I mean, my grandmother was an elections commissioner, but she didn't do that until I was almost in college. I
Mm-hmm.
had some bureaucratic family members that worked for school systems, that worked for the state, cops, the news, things along those lines, but nobody really in politics, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. But I've always seen politics as an avenue to problem solve.
Mm-hmm.
I also see it as an avenue to truly secure freedom for
Mm-hmm.
Black women and other folks who've yet to truly obtain life, liberty, and happiness, or at least a clean pathway to it. And so
Right.
I saw this as a pathway.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have connections in this pathway, but I knew I could go to school for it. And so I majored in broadcast news and politics because I thought I was going to commentate and tell the story and I wanted to be a political analyst. And at that time, it was hard to become a political analyst. Now anybody can become a political analyst, but that's what I was going to school for, to be an observer. My uncle worked in news and I used to listen to him all the time. I would get when I was a little kid on the potty, I'd get things in the bathroom and read them in my broadcaster voice, right? I would do things like that. And so that is where, the connection for me came. Now, when it came down to really diving into politics, I had to be bold because no one was asking for me to engage. They might ask me to volunteer, to make phone calls, but they just wanted me to do as I was told. But I wanted to solve problems in addition to do what I was being told. And it took an individual who's a journalist now who invited me to an event. And I showed up to this event. It was called the Harkin Steak Fry, a former senator in the state of Iowa, one of our longest in the state. And so I showed up to this event, and it just so happened that we had all of the political candidates that were in the 2007 running for president.
Okay.
So it was Brock, it was Hillary, it was Vilsack was up there. I mean, it was so John Edwards. It was a lot of people. It was like 13 different candidates, and I got to hear all their pitches to this group of people on why they should be president, and I was so moved, so engaged, and I'm like, okay, this is the path, and it's not perfect, but I want to be a part of perfecting it. And so that's what really made me dive into it. The fact that it is a communal sport, or it should be, was one of my motivating factors, because I'm a team player. I like being a part of teams. I don't always like leading them, but I like being a part of teams. And so this was a team sport that I wanted to be involved in, and I wanted to add value to, because I knew then and I know now that my very existence would not be as it is, as clean as it is, as free as it is, not as free as it could be, but as free as it is. It wouldn't be as free as it is if people hadn't have committed their lives to problem solving and public service before me, people who looked like me. Harriet Tubman was not a concierge. She was a strategist, right? Like she was deep into problem solving. Frederick Douglass was not just professorial, not just a speaker. Like he was engaged in the abolishment of slavery and got his hands dirty in the process. And so yeah, that's just kind of how I landed in the desire to be in this space. And ever so often I think about stepping back and pulling back, and because the space is not built for me and meant for me. I have to continuously push through, exceed whatever expectations exist, not even mindful of them on most days of the week. But not only do I have to exceed expectations, more importantly, I have to set my own. And that's the hardest part, setting my own and staying accountable to them, because nobody else is going to hold me accountable to the vision that I have of freedom for my country. I have to hold myself accountable to that. And that's hard. That's hard. It's like entrepreneurship at its worst, because your life depends on it.
Right. Right. And I think too, your life depends on it, but if the changes are made, the lives of other people that look like you.
Absolutely.
And
And that's
almost
why I
like
say my life depends on it, because again, it's communal. There's no democracy of one.
Yep.
How
That's
to
right.
one many.
Yep. Absolutely. So it really sounds like just like what you said, is that it's the history. It's things that have kind of already happened that are continuing your drive and your purpose there. So can you talk to me a little bit about the experiences that you had running for Iowa Secretary of State, running for governor? And I mean, you visited every county in this state, which almost.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, 99, like
Well,
any number out of
I
99.
have visited all of them, but I didn't visit all of them in both of those settings.
Gotcha. Well, in total, I'm talking about
I've been to every
both.
county in
You've
the
been to
state.
every county. I think I've got like 10 on
sure you have
on
more
my
than
roster,
10.
and I am from here.
I am sure you have more than 10.
I don't know, man. I don't know. It's funny because when I lived away, and people Emily, where are you from? I'm from Iowa. "Oh, okay, so you're from, corn and fields." I was like, no. I'm from Des Moines. There's a really, really big difference. I'm from the actual city, But I'd love to kind of hear what kind of propelled you into that sphere.
Yeah.
I think seeking political office is a brave move because I feel like you are now put on display. And anything and everything that you have done in the past is also going to kind of like dictate what your future is going to look like. And people are now, you are campaigning for people's trust. And once people trust you, they will vote for you. So, would you talk to me a little bit about what it was like to run those races,
Yeah.
maybe some things that you learned? And then, of course, I'm going to follow it up with, do you plan on doing it again?
I learned so much, so much, so much. Both experiences were incredibly unique. Before I ran for governor, I thought that running for Secretary of State was preparation for that, not by any stretch of the imagination, because they were very, very starkly different races for a number of reasons. The reason why I ran for Secretary of State is because in the state of Iowa, our Secretary of State oversees small businesses and they oversee voting. I'm a small business entrepreneur. I help other people start their businesses and help them grow. That most of the work that I have been committed to. I started a business when I was an undergrad at Drake to do just that, and I was just an avid voting advocate. And at that time, there were risks that were happening and threats to our voting system, and those threats ended up being promises that were kept, and the destruction of and the integrity of our voting process was compromised by not only a legislature, the then Secretary of State. He's still the Secretary of State. And so I ran there because I wanted to see change. I wanted to be a stopgap for the damage. And that was the closest race that I ran. I think I lost by about 4 or 5 points or something along those lines. It was a race that could have been won. However, and people will say that we could have won. Yeah, we literally could have won. But unfortunately, we ran out of the resources to help us get to that win. The way you win races is to let people know that you're running. And too often, people don't know you're running until past the election. Fast forward to the governor's race. Intermittently, what I did in between my Secretary of State's race and the governor's race was worked for then Senator Harris and her run for president. And that was an incredible journey as well, learning just the federal side of elections and campaigns and things of that nature. And then I opted in to run for governor, and it wasn't a decision. Mind you, I've never planned to run for anything. So if folks are listening to this thinking, oh, because she's a broadcast news major, she's a politics major, she's always running to run. No, I didn't think there was a pathway to run. I didn't think it was possible for me to run, so I couldn't see it. I literally could not see me actually doing that. The closest thing I could see myself running for was student activities board president at Drake University, which is what I did then, and being a school diversity interest senator and things along those lines. And so running in real life, no, I'm this girl from Mississippi. I'm not even from this state. Like that didn't make any sense, right? But it did make a lot of sense because I saw I saw something in Iowa that it didn't see in itself, and I continue to see that in this state because I've been in other states. I told you I came here and I found out what freedom really looked like, and freedom's not dead. Freedom is not dead. We just got a few people in leadership that are holding it hostage at this point in time. And so I ran because I wanted to see progress happen. I wanted people to have that life and that liberty and that happiness and not be encumbered by government. Education was an incredible challenge during my race and still is. The funding of it, the support of the system, ensuring that the professionals in the system are comfortable, like our teachers, our administrators, that is still at risk in this state at this point in time. Mental health was a big deal and still is. Healthcare in general, access to reproductive healthcare is an incredible challenge. I had conversations with women who were having to drive 45, 50 miles to go have their baby in labor, drive that. I mean, that's just, we're in 2024. It takes about 5.5 hours to get from one side of the state to the other. We're not that big. We're a state of about 3 million people. There's no reason why we shouldn't have access to maternal health care so we can birth tomorrow's future out healthy. I mean, and there were so many other challenges with farmers and land and eminent domain. And there was just a lot of things that we were talking about. And while I had answers to some things that because I that was my expertise and I knew how to add value to that, what was most important is that I had the ability to see what was necessary and bring people together that could help solve the problems. Unfortunately, I got 40% of the vote in that election cycle. I only had $2 million, the lowest amount of money that anybody could have running for governor in any state across this country. My opponent had 12 million. I didn't run out of money. I wasn't in the red. I didn't owe money, but I didn't have the resources I needed to connect with individuals. Right. And so, but again, a lot of political reasons why that happened. It should not have happened, but we won't go into that because it's not a political show. We can learn about that at another time. But you know, I at the end of the day, I was committed to freedom in this country and still am committed to freedom in this country. I ran because I knew I could add value. And it didn't matter who asked me. There were people who pulled me to the side. Well, why are you running for this? And who told you to run for this? And why don't you run for this? And why don't you run for that? I learned a lot about trust. I learned a lot about really being strong and forthright in my decision making. You know, when you're running for office, there's so many decisions that you have to make in a very short period of time. And so, you know, there was a lot of problem solving that came along with that. So I was able to sharpen my skills. And so when we talk about me becoming a grown woman, man, that race was rough. Right. It wasn't nasty. It wasn't grueling, but it was rough. And the roughness wasn't really coming from the Republicans. The rough was coming from my own party. Because it is challenging for my party to see people like me and believe that those people like me can help them. Even though we reared this nation, we were wet nurses to a lot of the descendants of the people who are in current leadership. It is impossible right now for them to see people like me in leadership. We are even having this problem at the highest of offices. People are questioning President Biden. They're not questioning him because they don't think he can win, although they are saying that. They're questioning him because they question his successor. Correct. Anytime you have a president that's running for office, you want to know that they can do the job and you want to know that they have longevity in doing this job. And there's a question about his longevity. And rather than answering that question by saying, man, he got the baddest mamma jamma as his BP that this country has ever seen, they answer the question with, we need a new nominee.
Yep. And, you know, this is my podcast. I'm going to just go ahead and talk my shit. Your run for governor, I remember watching your commercial, your announcement, and I just remember thinking like, okay, so this Black woman is going to go and she's going to visit and she's going to tour the state and she's going to talk to people in this very red, very conservative state that we live in now. And she's going to do it with grace and with poise and she's going to go out there and listen. Wow. Because there are even some counties I wouldn't even go into in the state. That's number one. It took a lot of bravery and courage to even do that piece.
It really didn't, though. Real talk, really? It really didn't. And let me tell you why. The fact that this is a red state, quote, red state, are messaging points by the people who want it to be red. And we were adopting those messaging points, right? And if you remember in the 2022 election, politics is just like any other type of sport. You do whatever you can to get your opponent off its game. You get them to question themselves, to question their identity, to question their ability to perform. And so they basically played captain of the flag and said, this is ours now. The numbers don't say this is a red state related to voter registration, but related to voter participation. This is red. But when I'm traveling across the state, I'm talking to real everyday folks who may not be able to see me initially as being able to lead them, but they can see me as a human being. And by the time we're done with the conversation, then they can see me leading them. The challenges really are less with the voters and more with leadership. People who have money, people who have elected titles, people who have resources. Those are the folks that are the loudest. Those are the folks that are busting down the door to talk to the press and talk to the media. So when the press says hey, we've been talking to voters. Yeah, you did talk to somebody who does vote, but you didn't talk to anybody on 13th Street right off of Forest Avenue. You talked to somebody south of Grand and whose address doesn't even have their name listed because they have that much money. That's who you talk to, right?
You
And
talk to
so
someone that doesn't live on a numbered street.
yes, and that is a game in politics. And I wish more people understood that, but in understanding that, then you lack even more trust. But this state isn't as red as people call it out to be. There are some tough communities, but I've had tougher conversations in Polk County than I had in Steve King country. I felt more welcomed in Audubon County. Audubon County, I had an overflow crowd in this random bar where they rigged these microphones together so that the overflow people could hear me. I've had more of a rousing engagement in some of those places than I had in some of our most difficult areas in Polk County, who are supposed to be.
Right. I think also too that that really speaks to just kind of like what those pockets are. We understand that Polk County, Johnson, and Lynn County are our typical like blue counties here in the state, but we're really not understanding that just because a county is red doesn't mean that's where the majority of those votes always go. So that's a really interesting point. But the one point though that I really did want to say, and I remember hearing rumblings of this when you ran for governor, was you having the opportunity to debate Kim Reynolds.
Don't call that a debate though. That was not a debate. That was a round table discussion with no rules, no guidelines, no questions that they gave us in advance, no nothing. They just said, we're going to sit down and 3 journalists asking us questions on Iowa Press. There were no time limits, no nothing.
Yes. And
as a former speech and debate kid, that was not a debate.
That wasn't it, right? And you know,
if I had debated her, it would have been on and popping.
It would have been over. On and popping. And that was a conversation I had, was like, okay, wait a minute. I really love how like we're playing this, how, we're going to come together and talk about the issues. You don't do that in any other political sphere. It is a sparring match. You are going back and forth. This doesn't make any sense. And I think one of the reasons why they didn't want that is because that's exactly what was going to happen. And I feel like your 40% shocked the hell out of them anyway. So had you had that actual traditional debate, that 40%, in my humble opinion, would have been a lot closer, and then they would have really been shook.
Absolutely.
So that, like, this wholeheartedly,
they put baby in the corner.
They really did. And, you know,
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. And I feel like for me, and I see this a lot, especially being a Black woman, I'm not in politics or entrepreneurship, but I am in higher education. And for the programming and the advocating that I do for students of color at a public university, it's really hard because, again, the greatness isn't expected. But when you get a taste of what I can really do, then people get scared. You know,
it took me, because of the format. I mean, we did a lot of debate prep because I wanted to be very tuned in on all of the issues that not only meant something to me, but meant something to Iowans. And, you know, without having any parameters other than the fact that this conversation, I think it lasted an hour. That was our true, we'll have an opening statement and a closing statement, no time on any of that. It was so challenging to prepare. And so it took me, because I'd never been on stage with her. I'd met with her several times, one-on-one even, prior to me running against her. So I had to look at other debates and study her and study her practices then. But again, she'd never debated a woman before. She'd only debated a man. And so I didn't know how she was going to be. It took me about 20 minutes to kind of figure out my bearings. Now, in hindsight, knowing, since I've done it once, now it don't matter who I debate. I get it, right? Whether it's a round table or not, it won't matter who. I understand how to take command of a conversation. But I went into that conversation. Here's the key why it took me so long. I went into that conversation thinking that I was subservient, that I had to prove something rather than just sitting in my authenticity and taking ownership of my being.
Yep.
That's why it took me so long. Now, I might not have done it the entire time, right? But it took me about 20, 25 minutes to be, okay, now I'm comfortable.
Right.
But my comfortability shouldn't have had anything to do with her. It should have had everything to do with me.
Right.
But lesson learned.
Yep.
Lesson learned.
Exactly. And we could we could also go ahead and throw it on the table that that is just another systemic way to protect whiteness as well.
You know what?
But we'll have that conversation another day, you know? We don't have to have it out like we know it, but we don't have to.
How do you protect and progress? How do you protect and progress? Because we can't protect at the risk of not progressing. We just
no. It speaks to the fact that Black women have never really been protected, and we've always had to just progress. So, again, we'll have a conversation later. But before I get into the last part of our convo, do you see yourself running for office again?
Oh, I absolutely see myself running. I do see myself. I envision myself doing it, but I don't know that I will.
Okay.
I'm going to let the Lord lead me there the same way that he did in these last ones. Because again, before that, I never saw myself running for anything. And the only person's permission that I asked for was from my Father in heaven. And so, and then I did ask for my husband's permission.
I mean, you know, because he might help here and there.
Oh, I mean, just to that point, like, I mean, it was a family affair. The unfortunate part in the governor's race and the Secretary of State's race, he was right by my side, traveled with me in the beginning. He was my driver. I didn't have any staff. That's what he took me from place to place while I was prepping and making phone calls and doing all the things until my staff actually came. This governor's race, talk about systemic challenges. His employer at the time asked that he had nothing to do with my race. And so as a result, my husband had to be distant from what his wife was enduring. And that was really hard.
Yeah, I bet.
Because 9 times out of 10, they're always, if you have a spouse, they're like, how involved are they? Because they know if they're not involved or they're not for it, then it's going to cause a strain on the relationship. And so his employer asked him to not be involved. But, you know, they were a tool being used in somebody's tool chest. And I hope they feel good about it.
I mean, I hope they do too. But I also hope they don't sleep at night. Anyway, so as we kind of wrap up our conversation, one thing that I always want to do is make sure that these episodes, these conversations, people are leveraging them and thinking about how the information they're receiving could help them. And for someone like yourself who has been involved in community and civic engagement and local politics, I feel like I need to have you back on the show as well to talk about the being dynamic in, you know, women in sports. And since you did,
we didn't get to talk about
team. Sports. I know, right? Like I literally am thinking like I could have you on for like 3 or 4 more episodes so we can talk about these things.
Absolutely.
But in this instance, you know,
I'll just say like, go east, and then you go ahead and ask your question.
Me being a Rough Rider, I can absolutely say
all
go
the Rough Riders.
Yes, not athletic at all. I ran track JV as a senior, so
I'm just doing
shape. I did it to stay in shape and to look good on my college applications.
Fair enough.
Not looking
Fair
for
enough. Way to have a plan. Way to be intentional.
That was my plan.
I don't need no medals. I just need to be in shape.
I just need to be here. That's totally fine. Actually, I did get a Letterman jacket in high school, but I lettered in orchestra sophomore year. So, you know, that was my
the band and the orchestra when I was in high school. They sported them Letterman jackets better than anybody else. Anybody else, especially marching band.
And listen, Deidre, mine still fits. I can't button it, but I can still put it on and look cute. So that's all that really matters. But I digress. So, you know, You co-founded Ladylike, and Ladylike had the Power Summit this past April that I attended, and there was just a really awesome session on civic engagement, and we had some amazing Black women that are also involved in local politics, such as Councilwoman Renee Hardman. She's the first Black woman to be elected to the City Council in West Des Moines. We had Mary Wells, who is our current county treasurer, and then a few other women that are also on local school boards and things like that.
Yep.
And I think the common thing that I got out of that was kind of be the change. If you see an issue and you don't see anyone else sees that issue as a priority, you can make it a priority. So if there are Black women that are in our communities and they're wanting to be more involved, whether it be within their community, whether it be within city politics, voting, etc., what are some things that you wish you knew when you started that you would give them as pieces of advice as they're thinking about focusing on this work?
Will give them this one succinct piece of advice, and it's almost a strategy of war, a strategy of battle. If I'm your enemy, I'm going to try to find your greatest strength and turn it into a weakness. When I coach basketball, we would do this. For example, if we have identified a shooter, she shoots a lot of threes. That's the strength on the team. That's what's driving the wins. We're going to turn that strength into a weakness. So we're going to double her and we're going to force them to give the ball to somebody else. The same goes when it comes down to civic engagement. Our greatest strength in civic engagement is our voice. Our greatest strength in pursuing our freedom is our voice, whether we use it at the ballot box or we use it in other spaces and decision-making tables. For so long, they have tried to turn our voice into a weakness. They've used laws. They have used tactics that impede on our pocketbooks, our bags. They have demeaned us and treated us differently because of our interest in wanting to participate in this thing called democracy. And so the biggest piece of advice that I can give you is that your voice means something, and anybody who says otherwise, disregard their existence on that question and that answer, because your voice is so powerful. And not only is it powerful on its own, man, when it bands up against other Black women, can't nothing touch us. Can't nothing touch us. Like our voice in the suffragette movement in to pass the 19th Amendment in what was it, 1923 or something along those lines. White women were having a hard time getting that passed through. And there were a lot of progressive folks that were on board with it, but they're like, how you gonna just have your vote matter and you don't have the Black women's vote matter in this conversation? And so we were then put in a position to use our voices to really push this through. And as a result, it happened. You don't always see it written like that in the history books, but when you go and find those Black suffragettes that were invested, many of them were founders of organizations like Alpha Kappa Alpha and Delta Sigma Theta. Like they were invested in those organizations as well, especially Delta Sigma Theta. Like it's a part of our blood. It's a part of our history to use our voice. And at every decade, they try other things. When I say they, it could be anybody other than us, and sometimes us as well. There will be attempts at every decade to diminish the value of our voice. But if anybody believes in it, I need you to believe in it, because it's so critical. It's so important. Even when I disagree with you, holler up, like say what you got to say, because it means something.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like I've said this a couple of times in conversations with friends and then also on this show, is that I really feel like Black women have always stepped into their purpose, but something about like this last decade, I feel like I'm seeing it more. And maybe it's just because I'm starting to do it myself. So then I am seeing it, so it's kind of like when something is kind of like presents itself, you start seeing it all over the place. But I really love, especially seeing it here in Des Moines. I really love all of the things that Black women are doing. I really love how we are all supporting each other, and events like the Power Summit, like the Juneteenth tea that Black Women for Healthy Living,
Yeah.
and all of these other just different amazing organizations
Sister Soul
and Sister
Fest.
Soul Fest. Yes,
Yeah.
all of these ways that we are all coming together to support one another. It's
Mm-hmm.
also getting recognition from other
Mm-hmm.
places that we didn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily think were there. So I think
Mm-hmm.
your words really speak to your passion of history and honoring it in
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing now. And I absolutely love that. At this time, though, I want to make sure that I give you a chance to also just let people know where they can follow you and where they
Mm-hmm.
can find you.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your socials, maybe some
Yeah.
events that you have coming up, as the school year gets started and things like that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me at Deidre DeJear on all platforms. Some of them are more active than others, but you can find me on almost all of them. I also am a part of an organization called Vision Leads. I founded it, and it's nonpartisan civic engagement work. We've identified 70 precincts across the state that have less than 40% turnout. In fact, the voter turnout in these precincts on average 36%. That's where you see mostly African Americans, Latinos, are
Mm.
working Iowans. Now, comparatively, that turnout is 73% across the state. And so there's a
Hmm.
big disparity in these areas. And so if folks want to volunteer and get involved and not have to raise your hand for a candidate, just raise your hand for the act of voting. I really urge you to go to Vision Leads. Our website is visionleads.org or Vision Leads on social platforms to find it.
Okay. Awesome. Wonderful. Yes. And I'll make sure to have all that information linked in the show notes. Deidre, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. And I'm going to be in your inbox because, like I said, I got 4 other ideas I'm going to need you
Cool.
to come back and talk to us on. So thank you so much for being with me today and having this conversation. Everyone, I am going to take a quick break and then we'll come back at the end for my reflection and thoughts on the next episode. A big thank you to Deidre DeJear again for being a part of the show this week. And really just talking about not only the importance of civic engagement for her, but also just letting us know what her backstory was. Finding out that she was born in Mississippi, grew up in Oklahoma, and then she came here to Iowa. Um, for college and to do all of the wonderful work that she's doing. It's really awesome to have somebody like her as a pillar in our community. And there were so many good things that came out of this podcast. I have a full list of notes that I typed up. But one of the primary things I really want to talk about is something about civic engagement is more than just voting. It's about participation. Being an active participant in your local government is incredibly important, y'all. We know what is happening right now in the state of Iowa. We just saw that for the first time in the history of our country, civil rights were taken away from a group of people. Gender identity, you basically is something to discriminate against now. And the removal and attack of DEI at our public universities and basically our state legislature, bullying private and community college, saying that you shouldn't have these things on your docket either, and that certain classes like African American history, Asian American history, gender studies, and things like that can't be required classes anymore for students to attain degrees in various different fields. This is a frustrating time. And this is also what happens when we don't have enough active participants in our local government to really put our elected officials to task in ensuring that they are voting and acting in our collective interest as a community, as a state. I really think that moving forward, something that I'm going to definitely start doing, and I would encourage everyone else listening to this podcast to do, is to definitely highlight and do something that Deidre said on the show. And I've had other people on the show, like Councilwoman Renee Hardman. I had Audrey Kennis on the show, and they have all echoed the same thing, and that it's important that we're showing up to city council meetings, that we're joining different boards and finding different ways to serve our communities. Um, that's critical, y'all. And I know that it is hard to do, but I really think that with engagement becomes a society that we all want to be proud of, and that we are living in. I will tell you guys right now, with the way things are going in Iowa, This isn't the Iowa that I grew up in, and it's incredibly frustrating. The United States of America, I feel like, is just a raging dumpster fire at this point, with so many federal workers losing their jobs. Um, and the so-called consolidation of government, which really isn't working. It's not saving us any money. It's not doing anything beneficial. Again, the general election for president is important, but you guys, we really have to start getting in the ground level, and doing a lot of different things there. And then when we start doing those things, then we can really start to figure out different ways to also give back to our communities as well. The other thing that she that Deidre did talk about is emphasizing that your voice has power. The emphasis that your voice absolutely has power is incredibly important, y'all. And we really have to take that to task and understand it and mold it and really leverage it more than we have. Everyone's voice matters in our society. And I really think that if we were, as a society, doing a better job to get together and form community, that voice becomes a lot stronger. So the next 4 years are going to be incredibly hard, but listening to Deidre's words, and really understanding where she's coming from, what drives her passion for civic engagement, and why she continuously keeps going is really the biggest takeaway from this episode. And I really hope that you all heard that loud and clear. So, with that being said, that is the episode, y'all. Please be sure that you're following me over on Instagram and TikTok at Black Girl Iowa, and also on my YouTube channel. Don't forget, this podcast is streaming on all your podcast services: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. So until next time, I'll catch you guys later. Bye.